I have the great good pleasure today to be here with Sevilla King from Equality Existence. Good to see you here, Sevilla.
You too, Karen. Great to see you.
We decided we had to get together because there's been so much good stuff lately with Jonathan Pageau at the Consciousness and Conscience Conference and with Tammy and Matthieu Pageau having a conversation. We wanted to get at this while it's still fresh and it fits in with so many of the things that we've been talking about. So Sevilla, I hear that you got to go to the conference in
Yes.
Cedar Bay.
Yeah, that was great. It was very, very nice.
So first of all, did you drive up there?
No, I took a plane straight to Thunder Bay. Well,
Okay.
not straight. I had to go through Toronto.
And how many days were you there?
I was there 4 nights.
Oh,
So
wow.
so I was there through the entire conference. It started halfway during the day on Thursday. Well, it started earlier, but a bunch of people went and did an event. I don't know what it's called, airsoft,
Paintball?
paintball, something like that, in the rain. It was, pouring, but there were troopers, and
That's a
the
guy thing, I think. Yeah. The worse, the grungier, the better. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then Friday was a particular agenda. I mean, you've seen all the clips appear at this point.
Yes, uh-huh. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I guess I'm more interested, did you get to meet a lot of new people? Did you get to meet any of the people that have been on your channel or people that correspond in the comment section or
Well, I got to meet, obviously I got to meet Paul, Jonathan, and
Mhm.
John, so that was really nice. And spend a little. I actually went out to lunch with John and Christopher Master Pietro, who came on Saturday.
Wow, nice.
Managed to show up, which was really nice. So I had met Christopher before, as you know, he came to DC.
Hmm.
So that was actually the first. It might have been unless it was there was a couple people from the book club that I met earlier, but he was the first person I met in this little corner. And then so we had lunch, and I met many nice people there, but there were a couple of people who I really spent some time with, and we had lunch. They joined me for lunch with John and Christopher. Lizelle, who came all the way from the Netherlands, and her friend Robert, who lives in Florida, who's really quite the expert in. They circle around John Vervaeke more than anything, and are really unpacking Plato. I mean, they're sort of Plato experts, which is interesting for me because I'm not, and I'd like to
Yeah.
be more. And since it's kind
Me
of
me
like,
neither.
but it seems like Neoplatonic writing and the early church fathers and Plato himself, of course, figure into a lot of what informs people's trajectory in this corner. So
Well,
that was
more and more from what I understand, Plato is beginning to inform a lot of the scientific community as well.
well,
So,
that's good to know. Do you
yeah.
know anything about that? Do you know
Well,
specifically what's happening?
um, I just hear rumblings here and there in the scientific community of people that are saying that they have to get back to a Platonic worldview. I don't know. I mean, even Michael Levin, who isn't at all interested in talking about the theological side of anything, he considers himself Neoplatonic, and so he and John had a really good conversation about that when they were discussing all the biological things. Um, So yeah, so you had a great time, and
Yeah.
you said that the one talk that really stood out to you was the one that Jonathan did on love and attention. So maybe you
I
want to give us
mean,
just a little review of what that was about.
I just want to say that all the talks are really good. And one thing that was really cool was seeing, Paul did a sermon on Sunday, so I got to see him in action as a preacher,
Hmm.
and that was something else. He's fantastic.
Well, do you not watch it? I about 50% of the time I watch his sermon prep that he puts out every week. He
Right
puts out
after
a
school.
where
Yeah.
he does the message
Hmm.
in advance of doing the message, and so
Yeah.
you get to
But
see it kind of raw.
but it's something else to see him in action because he's
Yeah,
a formidable figure. He's very tall, and he really
a formidable figure.
Yeah, he is. He's like he's someone who really makes a great preacher because he's so
Hmm.
down to earth and everything on his channel. And in person, he's really you know, I wouldn't use the word intimidating or imposing or anything like that, but he's just like tall, he's elegant, he's got a great voice. So in
Yeah.
person, it's really quite the experience, and I'm very
Yeah,
happy
I
to.
had a chance to meet him a couple of times in Sacramento at a couple of different not estuary, but when he used to have these meetups.
Mhm. Yeah, so,
And just to get to see him in action with a group of people is really something.
yeah,
He's got a pastor's heart for sure.
and a real presence. So
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
yeah.
So I didn't really get much of a chance to talk to Jonathan Pageau, but we exchanged a few words, and that was very nice. He had to shuffle off, like not early, but in the middle of like early in the day on Sunday. I think he was joining Jordan Peterson. He was going off to England.
Well, yeah, and then I have been watching on Twitter where there have been pictures of him and Jordan in Israel
Mhm.
filming the Exodus
Yeah,
series together. So they're working on that right now.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's really exciting.
he's been super busy.
But Jonathan's talk really stood out, and I just released a video about it because he's talking about the good. He's talking about attention and the good, and it's right. It's very much like what Persick says about quality. You have this, and Jonathan John Vervaeke helps a lot with his language. You have the relevance realization, and that's the thing that's the most important thing to you at that moment for whatever you're doing. And it's like underneath it is the structure of cognition versus any particular object in the world, if that makes sense. So when you're talking about something, you're talking about um, what is the center of your attention for whatever you're doing. Like he uses the apple and the glass very frequently,
Hmm.
and it's like and the quality of that, the relationship you have with it has meaning. Like the relationship with the glass means you're thirsty, and that means that your relationship with the glass means you're going to have this particular need satisfied. But one point he really makes is that the way you look at the world depends on what it means to you versus breaking down everything into little particles, for example. Like you don't see all the atoms, milling around. You see the structure of the thing that means
Hmm.
something to you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the picture that I've had, the picture that built up in my mind over like 20 years of working with art was that somehow when we're born with like a I don't know what to call it, a framework, a matrix, something inside of us that has lots and lots of connecting places. And as data input comes in, and as we have experiences, and as we hear things, and as we speak and get feedback, and as we're loved, and all any kind of experience that we have, any sort of sensory experience, any sort of thought experience, all makes attachments onto this thing.
Mhm.
And then that builds this thing out so that it gets bigger and has more attachments and has more capacity to gain more of this stuff. But then every single thing that we experience or hear is going through that filter because that filter is already established who I am inside. So people say that's roughly what John is talking about when he talks about relevance realization. Because what's relevant to me in any given moment is going to be completely different than what's relevant to you in that given moment. Because,
Absolutely.
right, because of how I have been built out inside of me, in my consciousness, in my spirit, in my heart. Um, just as any movement that I make is going to be idiosyncratic to me based on how
Yeah.
much effort I put into building my body and being prepared for life and all of that. I am a complete unique individual in that everything that I hear and say and every song I hear comes to me in a different way than it comes to you because it fills in all these spots in me.
Right. Yeah.
And That has always just amazed me to think how we not only have unique DNA representing our physical
Hmm.
person, but we have this unique experiential DNA that makes us completely unique, which is why I always felt that personal creativity is so important because we can't always articulate the things that we understand in a unique way to other people. We can't use words. We're not always. I went through a period of time when I was raising my daughter and she was a toddler up until about 5 or 6 years old when I kind of lost my ability to communicate at an adult level, but I still wanted to communicate. So that's when I started painting because painting gave me an opportunity to say something that was inside of me that I couldn't put into words. So some people cook, some people um, some people paint, some people write. There's a lot of different ways that you can learn to articulate that inner self. And I feel like if we don't articulate that inner self, the world is poor because every person has something to offer into this kind of universe of individuals, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, there are a lot of things that have happened recently, mostly the fact that that we're so involved in the internet and social media that has kind of decreased, I think, our ability to be truly creative, and it's replaced with something much more superficial. Like, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening on Twitter solves the problem of creativity. People think they're expressing themselves and they get extremely involved. I mean, these days it's often from these, too political or cultural standpoints. And they get very invested in this, I guess you could say, and this is another term that Jonathan used in his talk, these distributed cognitions, and they are entities. And we get, trapped and involved in these entities that have a causal effect on us. And you really see that, you really see, like, let's just take these two cultural entities, right? People are very much like they're almost possessed by what these entities are telling them, even though we have created these entities. And I think, like, that's sort of a tangent, but people are possessed by these, and then they express this, and they have a sensibility that this is their personal creativity, and it is so superficial. It's not what you're talking about. You're talking
Mhm.
about taking the essence of who you are in any and then pairing it with some inspiration and coming up with beautiful paintings.
Well, even just coming up with a beautiful relationship. I
Mm.
mean, it is not just in working a work of art or something like that, but it's how we use our uniqueness and individuality in speaking into the world, whether it's in relationships or. But you used the word possessed, and that just grabbed me because there's a blogger that I've been reading for a long time named Ann Althouse.
Mhm.
I'll put a link to her website because she always says interesting stuff on there, and she's gotten onto TikTok lately. she had a TikTok she had a TikTok on there of this French girl talking about the word marotte, and the reason she was talking about it was that someone had made the comment that King Charles would not give up his many marottes when he took the kingship. And so she said, what does that word mean? So she went back and looked up the etymology of marotte. And marotte actually goes way back to the idea of the jester's scepter. The jester would carry this thing with a little
Bells
goat's
and
head
stuff.
and a bell
Yeah.
on it or something like that. But it later came to mean any sort of a thing that you become a fan of or that you kind of start investing all your interest in. It could be a hobby, it could be a political party, it could be anything where you get obsessed with this thing, and then that's all you think about, it's all you talk about. So it's very, in John's words, very reciprocally narrowing
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that represent. But I thought it was interesting that it was represented by this jester's
Mhm.
stick. Later on came to mean a lot of other things, but that was the beginning etymology of it. And apparently, King Charles has a few particular obsessions that he has, hobbies of or thought processes of some sort that really he doesn't want to give up in
Mhm.
order to differentiate himself. But I thought that word marot was interesting because the political stuff especially, I think, grabs people, and they lose any sense of individuality because now they're just part of the herd,
That's right.
whichever herd they're in, right?
Yeah, and these entities, these distributed cognitions or whatever you want to call them, emergent beings. I know that maybe they're demons. Just kind of rule over us in that regard.
Well,
Dictating every opinion, every thought.
in a sense, I mean, the biblical language, maybe it's not biblical, but the idea of opening a door to the enemy, opening a door to the other side, giving him a foothold or a stronghold in your life.
Yeah.
That's what it's equivalent to, really.
Yeah.
Giving these entities a stronghold in your life so that you lose touch with reality, basically.
Yeah. And they and what Jonathan was saying, he was talking about parasitic, like these entities will parasitize your that essential nature we have, which is being drawn towards something, which is love, which is attachment to things. Your
Mm-hmm.
attention and love are very much interrelated. And so if your attention is captured in a certain way, then they've also got your affection, let's say, or your love. Because when you look at these people on Twitter, it's as if they're defending their parents almost. You know what I mean? Or they're
Yes.
defending their children. I mean, it's like they're so invested in these strictly theoretical realms.
Yeah, I curated my Twitter down to just a handful of people
Yeah,
about
you
two
said you
years
got rid of
ago.
all the political stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a smart
And that's made a huge difference. But it's strange to me, even some of those people who are very intellectual, seemingly very spiritual people that I really admire and look up to, they have their issues that they will grab onto like that and they won't let go. And often it's got something to do with the virus.
Yeah,
People
right.
have very strong opinions on both sides of that. And yeah, it's really interesting. But going back to the whole attention thing and the love, so I think this ties in very much to Persig. I know you
Very
just
much.
did a video about Persig and Jonathan's uh, talk. I didn't get a chance to listen to your whole thing. I
Yeah, no worries.
apologize. But I wonder if you could just briefly talk about how attention ties into Persig's idea of quality, because some things have come up for me recently in my research that I think really fit in there too.
Hmm. Um, so, well, one word that Jonathan uses that really carries over into Persig is the word care. Like when you care about something, it's quite spontaneous. So let's say, like you with your painting, and Jonathan also gave an example of when he's doing artwork, that if, it's not even a particular thing you're trying to express, it's that notion that you're trying to, not a particular preconceived thing. You just have the sensibility of what you're trying to express in the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have, like, very frequently, you don't even have any kind of idea of how you want it to turn out, although you could.
Mm-hmm.
And um, as you're going, you have this quality, this love in you for the expression of this, let's say, the expression of quality itself that you were feeling. And so you care about every stroke you make, or every um, stroke of the paintbrush. And you can make this one, not that one, but the care drives you in a direction, and what you end up with is a painting.
Yeah, I think the care is intimately connected to the attention
Mm-hmm.
because um, I noticed a long time ago, I when I first started painting, I used to I like doing figures, and so I would project a photograph up on the canvas, and then I would paint the figure, and they always turn out nicely because I projected the photograph, right?
Yeah.
Um, But my teacher challenged me and he said, "You will never find out what your own style is if you keep using a projector. Throw
Yeah.
that thing away," even though it cost $389, which was a lot of money back in the day, right?
Right.
Um, so when I first started trying to draw figures, there's so many interesting things about it. One weird thing is that if you draw from the shoulder with your whole arm, you can draw more precisely than if you draw from your wrist,
Oh, that's really
your
neat.
hand. I don't know why that is. There's some connection between that large muscle mass and your brain
Right.
and precision and measurement and so forth that you can't get with your just your hand. But the point is, I would draw it and then I would have to look at it and realize that's not what it is. So then I would have to modify it a little bit. Okay, it's closer. I could see it in my mind. I could see what it was supposed to be, but
Yeah, that's
but
right.
it wasn't there, right? So I
Right.
have to keep looking and I have to keep modifying, and some things I have to shave off, and sometimes I'd paint away some part of it, and sometimes I'd add on
Yeah.
something. So your sensibility is always measuring somehow against this vision that you have. So you have the vision and then you're always measuring.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of conversations recently with Brad about measurement. And really, when you think about measurement and the ideal and how the ideal is a judge, and so this the quality thing that you're reaching for or the vision that you have, that's the ideal, and that is the judge, and the judge is always carving away. And I love the way Jonathan made this connection between, on the one hand, mercy, which is gathering in,
Hmm.
pulling in, and judgment, which is pushing away.
That's right.
But not judgment always in a negative or bad sense, but
Yeah.
judgment carves away what shouldn't be there.
That's right.
And so the other night I was um, laying in bed watching an old Narnia movie, and the one about, I don't know if you ever saw any of the Narnia movies,
Are
but
they the cartoons?
no, these were legit live action movies, the Chronicles of Narnia. There's one called The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Hmm.
And in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there's an annoying, nasty little boy named Eustace who thinks that he's the be all and end all and he's a
Oh, it
real
was annoying.
tyrant.
Right?
But he stumbles into a dragon's lair and sees all this gold there and sees this beautiful gold armband, and he puts it on his arm and it turns him into a dragon.
Hmm.
The dragon takes over his body. So for much of the movie, he's this dragon, but he doesn't want to be a dragon. He wants to go back to being a boy. And the way that he ultimately becomes not a dragon anymore is that he's trying to pull away this dragon skin, and then Aslan, who represents Christ, comes near to him, and Aslan starts helping him to separate it. But of course, it hurts.
Yeah.
Having this stuff pulled off really
Sure.
hurts, right? But then when he's finally freed from it, then of course
Yeah.
he's a boy again, and he's a completely changed boy.
Yeah.
He's not the same at all
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
all the stuff that didn't belong, all that dragon that was in him got peeled away, right? So that's the contrast for me between the mercy, the gathering in, the openness, the care, the
Hmm.
listening, the attending, the seeing, the gathering. That's all on the mercy side. And
Yeah.
then on the judgment side is the measuring, even taking apart, all, reducing things down to the parts and then putting them back together again. Um, I think Jonathan used the word decomposition at one point. Yeah. And then I think also in that category goes discerning and identifying and meaning.
Yeah.
Because in the conversation between Tammy and Matthieu, Matthieu, um, he was talking about how when Adam was naming the animals, maybe I can bring up this clip.
Yeah, that would be great. That's
Um,
that. Yeah, I think that was the part that interested me too.
their identity. So you see that the story of the flood is kind of the opposite of the story of Adam naming the animals. So you have Adam that names the animals. So that's an example of giving meaning to factuality or giving meaning to what is. And then with the flood, you have the opposite. So you have the identity of beings are falling apart, and there's confusion, like there's hybridity between animals. So this is in tradition, but these are very well established tradition that before the flood there were a mixture of animals. Like they started to create hybrids of different animals. Now this is important. It means something very, very significant. It means the identity of beings were getting confused. So that's why I said it's the opposite of Adam naming the animals, because Adam, when he names the animals, that's what he's doing. He's giving a clear identity to beings. But then in the flood, this identity is being confused, like they're being mixed together. And then what Noah does, the flood, the idea that there's water covering the earth, that is what it represents. It represents a confusion between, or it's not just confusion in the sense that we don't know something. It's also like a fluidity of things. Things change always. The definition of things start to change in a way where there's nothing stable and there's nothing fixed, and things get mixed up together. So that's what the water between heaven and earth represents.
I think I'm going to stop there because I wanted to ask you about something and what he said there. So he's talking about naming things, identifying things, which I would put over in this category of discerning, and of what I'm thinking about is when Jordan Peterson talks about these people who aren't differentiated, they're so agreeable that they never develop a personality or an individuality, and they kind of walk around in the fog. And I think that's connected with this flood thing, with not naming. Not being willing to particularize your life, not being willing to say who you are because you're afraid you might be wrong. And I wonder if you could say something about that from a therapist perspective.
Well, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because, it's very easy to be confused if you don't have, a lot of this kind of thing would go back to, were your parents able to help you develop yourself in a proper manner, which means, and this, you see these same patterns over and over again, which means help you deal with the reality of the world and its limitations in society, and being able to operate in it properly in the set patterns, the set social patterns, teach you the social patterns. At the same time, allow you to, like you were saying, have your own individual, like we have this, biological framework that's very similar, but how that framework, populates with experience is going to be quite different for all of us. So to allow that difference that your inclinations are going towards to develop too within the parameters of certain frameworks. So you aren't just sort of, a wash in a way. And there's a couple of things I think that can happen. One is like overbearing parenting, which, tries to enforce the parent's personality on the kid. And the other is way too lenient. So you don't, that structure doesn't develop properly. So one or the other could result in what you're talking about, I think. Like one is you haven't learned to differentiate yourself because you haven't been allowed to, because of, the draconian parental style, or you don't have enough structure. And so you're sort of, washing an anything goes type of mentality. And what's funny is a lot of times kids who are raised in a too lenient environment become quite rigid as an antidote later. So I think what he's talking about is somehow not being, it could be either one, like somehow not being grounded in the correct patterns, the correct which Matthieu talks about a lot, the correct, structure. And another is having it so structured that you're not able to learn how to navigate it yourself. But whatever the case, the thing that stands out to me, of course, is that you know that relationship between the two, which scales up and down in every regard, which is
The
why
relationship between.
the structure and the openness.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The structure needs to update, like he's saying, like these structures will update, but if they're allowed to update too much without any grounding, then you get what this water represents.
Yeah, so that fits right in. See, lately, I've been trying to read a lot of scientific papers. It's a challenge because I don't have the background, but
I hear you.
Michael Levin put on Twitter yesterday a paper that he and a guy in quantum physics named Chris Fields, and then Carl Friston, who's also, I think, a cognitive neuroscientist. The three of them published this paper together. And the basic idea of the paper, if I get it correctly, is that way down to the level of quantum mechanics, the same thing is happening all the way down through all the levels.
Yeah.
That, and this goes to information theory, and it goes to thermodynamics and all of these kinds of things. That the environment impacts the system, and the system impacts the environment.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
So I put on, I responded to him on Twitter, and I tweeted out and I said, okay, here's the quote. And basically that's what it said. It was a quote from his paper. And then I said, then does this mean that it's turtles all the way up as well? And he came back and he said, bingo. So apparently I found the kernel in that paper, and then he said, I will have more on this next month. We're working on it.
Oh, that's good.
But if it's turtles all the way up, then, like Glenn says, that would be a very good case for strong emergence. And strong emergence is that there has to be an emanation as well as an emergence. It can't just be emergence from the bottom up. Right. And so then that gets back to your idea of quality.
Yeah. And quality, spirit in the Pageau metaphysics, it's kind of the same thing. You're infused with this greater idea, let's say, that an idea is spirit, and how you manifest that is matter. Let's say you're inspired to make a painting, you manifest it with oil paints and canvas. It's the meeting of spirit and matter. And back to the attention thing, I think what he's, it's like, where do you put your attention? Do you put it on something good, or do you put it on something lesser? So if you're doing a painting, there's a pure attention that's directed. You could be painting something for someone else, right? You have a commission, and this is how you're going to make your living, and they want this. So that's your attention is here. But if you're really involved in the dynamic experience of self-expression, that's in a way a higher purpose. There's nothing impeding your expression in that. There's no person telling you what to do, and there's no paycheck at the end of it. You're taking your own inspiration. That's where your attention is, versus over here what the client wants.
Yeah, and it's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
I've done a few commissions, and man, it's hard. It's a lot harder than and it's hard for so many reasons, because like you say, your attention is drawn aside, and
it's drawn aside. It's drawn to partial, not the full. Because if you're taking whatever this inspiration is, whatever this quality is within you that you want to express, and you don't know what it is really, a lot of times it has to sort of be in relationship with your artist materials.
Well, so let me throw something out for you. in this conversation I had with Brad the other day, which hasn't published yet, it'll publish next month. Um, he was talking about agape as the in some ways agape is the ultimate observer.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of it as turtles all the way up,
Yeah.
the very top would be agape, would be
Yeah.
because God is love. That's the equal sign.
Right. And so each turtle is sort of a fractal representation of this ultimate. Is that what he means?
Well, for example, if you have a system and an environment, a cell is a system and it exists within an organ.
Uh-huh.
The organ is the environment of the cell. So the organ is having some authority over the cell, and the cell is having some authority over the organ.
Yeah, supporting the organ.
Then the organ is within the body.
Yeah.
So the organ is the environment for the cell, but the body is the environment for the organ.
Right.
And then the atmosphere around me, the heat or cold or whatever kind of environment I'm in, or even the cultural environment that I'm in, is the environment for my system as a human person. And then the nation is the environment for my cultural environment and the universe. So there's environment all the way up, and each system becomes an environment as you move up.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way down as well. But to me, that seems to be analogous to the observer and the observed.
Mm-hmm.
The environment is the observer, and the system is the observed. So then that means if it's turtles all the way up with the observer and the observed, then the ultimate at the top is still agape. Mm-hmm. So when you're in relationship with somebody, if you are both looking through the lens of agape, if that agape coming down is the lens through which you see each other, then the relationship is going to be more secure, and the proper balance of attention and discernment, or of care and of separation.
That's right.
Right? You're going to get the proper balance.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of, what John wants dialogos to be. Like guided by that, like ego out of it, at least not in the sense that someone wants to win or show off in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Like you and I are talking, and we're trying to make sense of these things we're looking at.
Yeah.
And in order for me to convey to you what I'm trying to say, I have to say it in I have to get a sense of where, like, we kind of have to come together as where our attention is going. Mm-hmm. And get rid of the stuff, like clarifying would be getting rid of the stuff that doesn't serve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of agape, I think that means that kind of approach that is open, like going along the quality track, let's say, like letting the conversation go where it feels like it's serving this thing that we're trying to, and we're not even defining it, the good, let's just say, or the good in context of this conversation, which is like you and I had a few things, we wanted to talk about, and just seeing how they come together and make sense of things. And that attitude we have, that open attitude, dynamic attitude, is agape. Is that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one aspect of it. And another aspect of it is something else that Matthieu was talking about with Tammy. Let me see if I can find that as well. I think it was right around 55.
Well, here's an example. I mean, I'll give you an example of Levin. You want to show the importance of someone. Let's say you want to show that someone's important. So you make a big parade with a lot of music and a lot of balloons. That's all Levin right there. Balloons, parade, music.
Oh, I apologize.
It's all
I apologize.
empty stuff.
It's actually 52.
Okay, that's interesting.
I mean, that part was good too. Yeah, I mean, it's all good.
It's all good.
We just don't have all day. So
No, we don't.
Bible. It's the concept of change and time and transformation. So if that's what you meant by chemical reaction, it's a transformation, and in that sense, yes. So it's also about leaven is a pretty deep symbolism, because it means something like it's a puffing up of something, but from nothing, right? Because the bread, it doesn't get more substance to it. It just becomes bigger. It's air, basically. It's a lot of air. Okay, so that is also, it represents the concept of time, because time is something that doesn't accomplish anything. It's a cycle. Okay, so the idea is you're doing.
So he's talking about the contrast between bread and the sacrifice of animals. And bread is leavened, and the air growing the bread is equivalent to time. Well, not the air, but the time that it takes for the bread to grow, that's equivalent to time in his picture. And then the other thing that comes up is at 103, he starts talking about the animal.
And then you, let's say, do whatever it takes to get your new career. Either you start a business, or you go learn something that you don't know. So this money is like the flesh that you're offering to the new idea that you have, which is to get this new career. Does that make a little bit of sense? So the idea is like heaven. It's pure. It's just an idea. If you don't offer flesh to it, it's not going to happen, right? You have to give it some substance, some potential, resources. You got to send resources to your idea. Otherwise, it's just an idea. It's just spirit. It's just so. And
it's a very simple idea there, that you have the idea. You have to sacrifice flesh to the idea in order for the idea to manifest reality. And so not only resource, but action is required. So, I mean, I could have an idea for a painting, but if I don't put in the effort to actually make a painting, if I don't waste the resource, when I first started painting, I used to be very afraid to try different things, because I was a watercolor artist, and the paper was so expensive. It cost $10 for a sheet of paper.
Oh, I remember rag paper.
So if you screw up,
you
just have to throw the paper away. And because watercolor, once it's done, it's done. You can't undo it.
Right. Yeah, you can. Did you try to do it with the whiteout? It looks terrible.
So anyway, you have to risk the resource, but you also have to risk the action and the time and the effort. And to me, that all comes back to love, because love is an action. So love is both the idea and love is the action. And you have to, sacrifice is an act of love. And in order to love well, there's a lot of sacrifice that takes place, because you're always factoring an opportunity cost. If I do this for this person because I love them, there's all these other things I can't do. If I spend this for this person because I love them, there's all these other things I can't spend my money on. So whether you're loving a person or loving an idea or loving agape as agape, then it always requires action, and that requires sacrifice.
Yeah, that makes sense, what you said, because if you do one thing, that means you can't do the other. So it inherently inaction is sacrifice.
Which inherently is a kind of judgment, because you're peeling off all these things that you can't do in order to do the one thing that you have determined to do. So there's an intention, and then you're somehow communicating that intention, and then you have to act on that intention.
Yeah, so your highest good would be, your relationship with this person, and lesser things have to go by the wayside.
Well, actually, in order to have a successful relationship with this person, your highest good has to be agape itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right. There was Jonathan's talk. You saw the whole thing, right? Jonathan's talk.
Um, I saw it through once. There was a lot there, and so I
Yeah,
started
yeah.
on it again. So
But
yeah, I have a rough
you
idea.
know that a lot of it is about sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what he's saying in there is, and I think he said something very similar to what you said. He said, well, you've got this. He uses the sports analogy a lot for this.
Yeah.
So you've heard this before. You've got this team, and it's really interesting. Everyone on the team has to sacrifice something. They have to show up for practice, and they have to work together, and no one can be the star. You just have to, the highest thing is to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone has to sacrifice for that. But at the same time, the whole entity of the team itself has to accommodate for its parts. That means not everyone's going to be the perfect player, for example. So you have to, like, one guy can kick really well, but he can't run that fast. I mean, Jonathan didn't say this, but it is something like, you have to accommodate for people's talents. You can't assume that just because everyone is focused on the highest good, that they're all going to be perfect about it.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some kind of leeway in that agape, in that understanding and that care that takes all these parts and puts it into the whole, which is the team, whose purpose is to win the game. And that structures the way everything works.
Well, sure. I mean, it certainly structures the way that you understand your own role in the team.
Yeah.
Because, like, if I'm Steph Curry and I'm the greatest three-point shooter of all time, not everybody on the team is going to be a great three-point shooter.
That's right.
But they all have other strengths that I don't have. And so it's my job as a leader to make sure that they get to exercise their gifts, because otherwise the whole thing isn't going to be as good as it could be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So that's how parts, through care, that everyone cares about this team being good. Everyone cares about winning the game. The care unites all these disparate parts and aligns them towards one good. And so that means part of them have to be sacrificed.
Well, and the other thing that's happening here, though, is that you have let's say the game is a system.
Yeah.
Or let's say the team is a system.
Yeah.
But they're in the larger environment of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the example. Steph Curry, so help me think this through. Steph Curry is this great three-point shooter, so he could just put himself in the position every single time to make a three-pointer and win the game all by himself. But it doesn't work that way, because the minute the other team knows that he's a great three-point shooter, they're going to double up on him, and they're going to keep him from being able to make any shot at all.
Yeah.
So if the rest of the team hasn't developed their strengths in other areas, his three-point shooting isn't going to do them any good at all, right?
Yeah. So the whole team has to share in the talent.
Yeah, and they have to be aware of what the environment outside. So there's this constant feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
With the environment outside.
Yeah, and constantly monitoring what the other players are doing and responding to that. And they're already prepared because everyone has gotten on board with this highest ideal, and they've already, sacrificed so much time to practice to join into that talent that makes this team what it is to begin with.
Yeah. Yep. And see, that works all the way down.
And
even with the.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It even works where, I mean, I suppose, I don't, you've been talking to the scientists much more. I mean, I haven't talked to the scientists at all, and you talk to them a lot, but it must mean there is some kind of sacrifice even on the inorganic level.
That's what I think.
That molecules can't, atoms can't go hither and yon and do what the hell they want. If they want to get anything done, then this is a Pirsig thing. Pirsig would say, you have greater freedom in teamwork. Like a molecule is a team of atoms that becomes much more powerful than any single atom on its own. And then that can turn into structures. So even, even on that low level, you're wanting to come together and create something bigger.
Yeah, and there's something very mysterious about that going all the way down to the quantum level. I was watching a lecture today by Eric Verlinde, who has a new theory about quantum gravity, which I guess has been the big mystery for 40, 50 years, is how
Oh, where is that?
the quantums, well, quantum mechanics and Newtonian mechanics don't fit together. They fit together on most things, and you can work out that each one has all the parts that they need, except when you in the quantum you can't get gravity typically
Yeah.
because a lot of things which I can't articulate, but I'm roughly aware of.
Yeah.
But he's working on a way to find gravity in the quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
But what he was talking about was, and I think I got this right, he was talking about qubits, which are the quantum bits, which they're going to be using for quantum computing.
Mm-hmm.
They can hold more information because in between the two entangled bits, you've heard of quantum entanglement,
Mm-hmm.
that when action is taken on one particle in some part of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
if it's entangled with another particle, doesn't matter how far away that other particle is, that other particle will be affected at exactly the same moment as this particle.
Right.
So if one is spin up, the other one will be spin down.
Yeah.
If that turns to down, this one turns to up immediately. And it's very peculiar thing, these entangled bits. But what he was saying is that when the bits are entangled, there's actually kind of like a pole, like a binary pole between the two,
Yeah.
where all this information can reside along this pole from 0 to 1. There's an infinite, and I think I've talked about this before, that there's an infinity of infinites between 0 and 1.
Right.
So all of that can be a place to store information because it's this whole sliding scale between this bit and this bit.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, that's peculiar because, I mean, we have those binaries in our world between dark and light. You can go infinitely,
Of course. Yeah.
between light and dark, there's an infinite number of spots, or between orange and blue, or
Yeah.
between judgment and mercy,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
so there's all these binaries that are, and it goes all the way down to the particle level.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And there has to be, I mean, things have to, in order to exist. And this is what's so cool about the Pageau brothers. The initial, the first picture is the separation of heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got something like the waters, right, which is undifferentiated potential. In order for us to perceive anything at all, there has to be one division. The division between heaven and earth. I mean, that's a cognitive reality. You can't know what something is without seeing contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's just a miasma. It's just undifferentiated potential. Light and dark. There has to be a difference between light and dark.
Yep.
And then at some point you discern what that is, depending on how you at that moment make that distinction perceptually.
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to context, right? Because you can think of something as a light gray until you put something dark next to it, and then it looks like white.
Yeah.
Or you can think of something as a medium gray, but then you put something light next to it, and that medium gray looks like black.
Mm-hmm.
So context changes everything, but there has to be that, and this is something else very mysterious. There has to be that initial choice, right?
Yeah.
That initial comparison has to be there. Otherwise, there's nothing. So this division between heaven and earth is either a moment of comparison or a moment of choice or something that's there at the very beginning. Because really, where does choice come from? And everything comes down to choice. We, the choice that we make in any given moment creates a context for what came before.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first division is heaven and earth, at least in this, in this cosmology. Or let there, I mean, there's let there be light, but I
Let there
think,
be light. Yeah.
but I think let there be light kind of means that. It means,
But it divides the darkness from the light, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So the perception, and that's what attention is, I think, because if attention is going to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not anywhere at all, then there's nothing. So if there to be anything at all, there has to be attention towards something.
Yeah, and attention gathers. Like I think it was Matthew Allison said, seeing curates.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't have the Bible right here, but it talks in the beginning about he gathered the waters together. He gathered the land together. So it's that attention that does the gathering. But that gathering is at the same time a dividing, because it can't all be this amorphous mass anymore. There has to be a division made. So there's the attention, the gathering, and there's the judgment, the pushing away.
That's right.
So everything comes down to that mercy and judgment.
Yeah. These patterns just repeat and repeat depending on,
Yeah. And accuracy. Well, let's go this way. Expression. Mercy is expression, and judgment is accuracy.
Yeah.
And the scientific worldview is accuracy. The left hemisphere of the brain is accuracy. The right hemisphere of the brain is expression, is mercy. So the left hemisphere is stability. The right hemisphere is plasticity.
Yeah.
It goes all the way down. And one of the things I love about Matthieu's book is that he starts talking about space and time in a way that sounds to me very much like the two hemispheres of the brain as well.
So, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But he kind of has it almost flipped from what I gather from Stephen Wolfram's picture of the universe. So I'd love to talk to Matthieu sometime about space and time, really pick his brain on it.
Well, let's hope he's out there more. I mean, he did the JVP interview and he talked to Tammy.
Mm-hmm.
I get the impression he might be more interested in coming out and talking a little bit.
Yeah. Well, he certainly has so much wisdom to bring.
It's amazing.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
But did you hear in his interview with Tammy, he said something like, I don't even let on a fraction of what I know. It's like,
because it would probably scare everybody.
Well, I think that's right. I think he's one of these people who is prescient, who knows what's going on and can see the patterns and where it's going.
Mm-hmm. And
he's saying something big is going to happen. What does that mean? I mean, everyone's thinking nuclear war, but maybe it's not that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's like a total shift in consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of feel like we're on the cusp of something. I mean, I keep meeting all these people who are turning from a blindness into a seeing. I mean, there's something happening. I don't recall this kind of thing in my lifetime. Now, I think back in the early 80s, when I first became a Christian, there was a kind of a movement across the country. Mm-hmm. We were kind of at the tail end of the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
When I first became a Christian, there was still some people who had come into the church through the Jesus movement.
Is that Crystal Blue Persuasion? Is that the that song? Is that
I don't know. Is that song connected somehow to faith?
I think it's from the 60s, but it's a moment where this fellow, Tommy James, I guess, was inspired by, I think it was Billy Graham. Crystal Blue Persuasion is the blue light of the black and white television set.
Oh. No, I kind of remember the lyrics going in the back of my head. I can hear the melody in the back of my head, but I never heard that story. That's fascinating.
So the Jesus movement would be somewhere around the hippie movement, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that was part of the hippie movement. We just recently had dinner with a couple who actually were part of that whole thing. They became Christians during the hippie movement. They moved out to well, they moved out to a commune, got into the drug scene,
Mm-hmm.
did that whole thing, but then later they had an experience with Christ while they were living in the commune, and so then they ended up coming back to civilization, getting a job.
Yeah. Responsibility, right?
Yeah. Um, so it was fascinating to hear their story, but the church that we used to attend in this area kind of grew out of that whole Jesus movement and very strong on what they call body life in terms of everybody in the church being connected with each other and hearing each other's stories and having open dialogue, and that all grew out of those young people coming in and being hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be something a little bit analogous to that happening now, but I think it's not going to happen in the institutional church the way the institutional church is right now, unless there's some big shift in consciousness in the church itself.
Well, it may be why people are trying to go back at least in this corner, in the periphery, the Orthodox route, because it's so. I mean, I think that's so connected to like what Persig would say, cutting deeper channels, going back to what's been lost and finding it again, and getting the dreck out of the channels and cleaning them out again. And I don't think it's something like. I don't think it's even liberal or conservative. I don't think you could even say that this is at all associated with politics, although, still people are thinking, well, Christian means conservative and, secular means liberal. I mean, this seems to be something beyond that.
Yeah, I totally think there's been a complete shift in the way we view those binaries.
Yeah.
It just doesn't even make sense anymore. If you
It
try to
doesn't
put them
make
in the
sense
categories that we used to put them in 10 or 15 years ago, it doesn't make any sense at all.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, certain things would have to, we've got like Jonathan was saying, you've got Facebook, and it had this human interest purpose initially, but it quickly got it quickly became waylaid, and the purpose was making money. So
Oh,
I'm
you think it had a beneficent purpose when it started? I mean, the way the movie just shows these guys trying to find a way to find the women.
Yeah, but it ended up. But I think the initial Facebook situation was that I mean, Facebook really was good for connecting with people that you hadn't seen in forever. And that is a really high purpose in terms of human relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, but I think the money just became like there's something that changed in Facebook where it was about selling your information, and mining your information, making tons of money and selling you advertising, which I don't think was in the original, at least the way.
Well, because you have to make money somehow. I mean,
sure, and that makes sense, but it just became all about money.
yeah, and so one of the biggest changes that they made in Facebook that made it completely useless to me is that if you haven't been on there for a week or two, it just drops off so that you don't see anybody anymore that you know. You just see a bunch of these promos that come through, and
Right.
I'm not on here to look at promos. I'm on
That's
here
right.
to catch up with people, but so I only get on now about every 2 weeks just to see if I've missed any birthdays.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And because it only shows me maybe 3 or 4 out of my 457 contacts, so
Yeah, so you just look at the birthdays and use it for that. That makes sense.
I get
But
it.
I think one of the things that would have to change is the focus, and this is the difference between a materialist and a more spiritual worldview, is the top thing at the top of the pyramid can't be money anymore if we want things to get better. I mean, I know that sounds really simplistic, but I think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what's at the top of the pyramid right now. Everything is guided by profit.
Well, I know the younger generation is seriously trying to find a way to live without money being at the top of their pyramid, but it's complicated, man. You
It
can
is
say that
complicated.
you can say that you want to get a job that meets your um, emotional and relational needs, but if it doesn't pay enough money to pay the bills, I mean,
No, that's true.
reality comes smack up against you at a certain point, and you got to have enough money to pay the bills.
No, that's for sure. But I think that if it's the top concern, which it is in general in most institutions these days, I mean, the whole military industrial complex,
Hmm.
people would argue that it's a machine to perpetuate war to make money.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think just lessening it in terms, I mean, not obviously, it's necessary, but lessening its importance and replacing that importance, like looking higher for something more important. And that would require a total restructuring of the way we see things. And I think it also, I think essentially, the essence of that probably is something like a totally new metaphysical understanding, which seems to be coming from both sides, from both the spiritual and the scientific side. And that's pretty cool.
Well, one of the intermediate steps, though, that's really quite a danger is that because people need something to focus on to draw them together, especially if you have great diversity and everybody is a different ethnicity and has different ideas and different backgrounds, that people need something to draw them together. And
Yeah.
the nation state is a convenient place to put that energy. So at least we're all patriotic, we're all dedicated to our nation.
Yeah.
But that can turn toxic really fast. I mean, that's what's
Yeah.
happened with Putin and his whole ideas, right? Let's make
Absolutely.
Mother Russia the top of the pyramid and get everybody rah rah about Mother Russia, and that can just turn toxic really fast. So I think it's like super important that we hold out the truth that there's something above, way above the nation state. That's the thing. This above is so far above that we can't comprehend it with our puny little human minds, and we keep trying to come up with something that's graspable.
Yeah. And I think
Here's
that's
here's an idea that Brad had when we were talking about measurement that I think is kind of an extraordinary thought. Maybe what Eve was trying to do in the garden was to become the observer herself, to put herself in the place of the observer so that she is the sole observer, which makes her the sole judge.
mhm.
Because if you are, you eat the apple and you have a knowledge of good and evil, now you're the one who can divide, you're the one who can discern, you're the one who can say this or not that, right?
Well, I guess her mistake was sharing that.
Well, so then we have opponent processing between the
That's
two
right.
equal observers.
Oh, yeah. Next time we talk, we should talk about opponent processing.
Yeah, for
And
sure. That
well,
would be,
actually, that's we can put that right into these things we're talking about. The
yes,
nature of that.
exactly.
Opponent processing is another model. It's like left, right hemisphere. It's like mercy and judgment. It's yet another way
Yes.
of describing
Yeah.
the same dynamic.
Well, and I think that's the thing that's at the basis of everything is this opponent processing, because the opponent processing is what produces the actuality coming out of the potential, new
Yeah.
things, creates new potential. It's creativity right from the bottom up,
Yeah.
opponent processing, which is why I think that McGilchrist's picture of the left and right hemisphere, the right and left, he calls it the master and
It's
his
emissary.
emissary, as though that there's an inequality there, that the right hemisphere should actually be the powerful one and the left hemisphere should be subservient.
Yeah.
But I think it's opponent processing, just like in a marriage. But then I think there's a lot of um, what's the word? Concurrence between the archetypal feminine in the right hemisphere and the archetypal
Right.
masculine in the left hemisphere. And I know he rejects that idea. He doesn't see them as masculine and feminine. Maybe partly because the popular media tried to make it so, and they made a lot of mistakes in the way they described the two. And but certainly in the way Peterson talks about the archetypal feminine, it fits right in with the right
Yeah.
hemisphere, which
Yeah.
then would mean that in a marriage, it's an equal, in one sense, it's an equal partnership, but
Yeah.
in another sense, it's equal opponents
Yeah.
continually butting up against each other. But it's also the environment and the system, and the environment and the system.
Mhm.
You know, one is the system with the environment, and the other one is the system with the environment.
Mhm.
So I think all of that is going on in
Yeah.
that space.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah, that would be really fun to talk about opponent processing, because I would love to hear more about it from a therapist perspective.
Okay. Well, let's make a, I mean, I love your idea of doing a monthly talk, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be great. This has been great, Sevilla.
Well,
Thank you
thanks so
so
much.
much. And yeah, um, have a great month. I'm
You
going to
too.
be offline for a little while because I'm having a surgery on November 8th.
Yeah.
But I've tried to stack up enough episodes to cover at least the month after my surgery. So,
Yeah, that's going to be like about 6 weeks of recuperation, right?
yeah, well, last time it turned into a year and a half of recuperation, but a lot of that recuperation I could still sit in a chair and do video.
Yeah, but I mean, on the practical
Yeah,
level,
the
driving.
first 4 to 6 weeks I can't be sitting up and talking to people. So,
All right. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that.
thank
And
you.
when you're ready, let's just do our. I mean, if you can't, if you're still recuperating, we'll start the monthly talks when you're ready.
Yeah.
Would like
Okay.
to do that.
Yeah. Sounds great, Sophia.
All right, Karen.
Have a great
Best
day.
of luck with everything, and I will talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.